we have a new poll that just came out. 61% of Americans say the Iran war is a mistake. It's a Washington Post ABC poll, which, by the way, in Iraq, it took more than 3 years to reach that high. And in Vietnam, it took 6 years to reach that high. So again, when you don't do the propaganda up front, this is what happens. People immediately are like, wait, what are we doing? Why is this happening? You didn't even bother to lie to me. You didn't even bother to tell me a good story. Like, what's going on here? And people have caught on to the fact that this is absolutely positively insane and it shouldn't be happening. And you know what makes that, hammers that point home even harder? When they go to the gas pump and it costs fucking $4.25 a gallon. That makes them think like, fuck, what the fuck is going on here? Okay, we also have this. Peter Baker says, when Trump pulled out of the international nuclear agreement with Tehran in 2018, Iran lacked even a single bomb's worth of uranium. Okay, so in other words, Obama's Iran nuclear deal worked. That's what he's saying there. He goes on and says, since then, it accumulated 22,000 pounds of enriched uranium. Good googly moogly. So again, if they want to, they would be able to make a bomb now faster. And for the stability and safety of the world. You know, it's insane how people are still so ignorant on what is unfolding. We have a 2 billion barrel shortfall and climbing every fucking day. A shortfall. How will that shortfall affect you, the world? You know, I think we're going to see gas prices hitting $5 average by the end of this month on that. Yeah. You're going to see $5 average. Nation average is going to be $5 by the end of this month, or maybe higher. Good morning, Cindy. So it's crazy what we're going to, what's going to happen. I don't know if you heard. Did you hear the announcement that that the Fed announced, where basically our deficit now is higher than our GDP? You know, the last time that happened was World War II. So for the first time since World War II, our GDP does not cover our deficit. You understand what that means? Our GDP does not cover. Basically, we can't make enough money to pay for our deficit. You know, and here we are paying more and more, money on shit. You know, Japanese are so fucking ignorant in all this. My wife was telling me about her company. They're having to pay like crazy amounts for stuff. They're, that they've had to stop. I mean, she works for a big, company, and she's feeling it. Darren, I'm sure he was promised. You know, it's so weird. It's like all he did was sprint through the lobby. You know, as it turned out, he didn't even fire a shot. Yep. He's not going to bankrupt. He's not bankrupting. He's taking down. He's like Nero. He's taking down the entire, the whole global economy with him on that. This is God, I love this is the only thing I really love at McDonald's. The sausage, egg, cheese.
muffin. Mm. Look, we got some pedo. We got some pedophiles in here. Look, we got some pedophiles. Mm. Damn, Rodney got. It's just amazing that I mean, Japan. They don't realize how fucked they are. Japan's fucked. But I'll tell you what. Given the historic record of Japan, there's no better place to be to weather out this chaos, right? No better place to be. The you know where we're going to be. The reason why I don't know if you guys realize that the um, I mentioned this yesterday. Did you guys hear that on the predictive markets they have more than 70% that Trump is going to be impeached by January, before January? That's because they know they're going to lose the House and there's going to be impeachment. Yep. Crypto. That's exactly what they're already doing it. The You have a new thing on your bank account called Fed something, right? On your bank account. That's the digital dollar, crypto. Not really. I haven't noticed any discrimination here, John. I've been here 21 years. Mm. But there's racial bias, which isn't, I don't know. I don't, most of that happens around military bases because of U.S. soldiers raping girls. You have a big problem here of servicemen raping girls in Japan. A little bit. Enough to order food and a beer and say, I don't understand. Yeah. Yeah. So like around bases, there's a lot of businesses that say no, no service, no foreigners. The other thing is we tend to be really loud. Look, I'm the only one in here. I'm the only one talking, right? And when you're going to an izakaya, which is a traditional Japanese restaurant, right, and you have a bunch of loud Americans sitting around, loud and speaking a language they don't understand, it kind of breaks the atmosphere. So a lot of izakayas, which is traditional Japanese restaurants, they know corners around bases, not around here, around bases. She wanted to go karaoke last night. I was still pissed off over the garden, so she's trying to make up to me. She's like, "Let's go karaoke." You know how she is with karaoke. I said no. I just watch movies. You don't have to worry about cops pulling up to you because you're not Japanese and saying, "Show me your ID." Like America, I mean, Japan is way more free than America. They don't have people roaming around, with in unmarked vans wearing masks. you know, going, can you imagine? I'm sitting here right now. All of a sudden, three guys show up and just starts accosting me. Detaining me, holding me, throwing me in the back of a fucking truck. Can you imagine that? I mean, that's what's happening in America. Greg, that's what you live in. You live in a Nazi country. I'm not crying. Greg, you're the one crying. You're all upset because I just pointed it out. Yeah, it's beautiful here. So, but I mean, the thing is we're so, we're so fucked, you know. And like all these big companies now are making massive earnings. They're making massive earnings because AI is basically saving the money. They can fire people. They're firing. They're getting rid of people. AI is doing the work. So you're seeing all these companies like Google, massive earnings, ABC, Alphabet, whatever, Meta, because the efficiency that AI is giving these big companies, right? They're they're taking over ad sales. They're just removing the inefficiency, which is the human worker, from it. So we're seeing these massive surges in profits, right? So everyone else, like you and I, we still have to pay crazy gas prices. These oil companies are making crazy amounts of money. $30 billion in profits in a month. Can you imagine $30 billion? Why are they turning around? I mean, this is the problem with capitalism. Capitalism is a few people who sit on the board, who are the shareholders, who are the 1%, are making all this money. Like they need the money. Like these fuckers need the money. Whereas everyone else, they have us fighting MAGA and MAGA coming in here, defending a pedo, defending a Nazi, defending administration that supports these billionaires. It's just like this. MAGA are just so. I mean, they're just brain dead. At this point, MAGA is brain dead. Because of the gas prices, JS? Why? Like Brandon. Brandon's just a brain dead dumb fuck. I mean, Brandon, God bless Trump. For what? For destroying our economy? For killing children? God bless him for what? For being a pedo, hanging out, for not releasing the Epstein files like he said he would. I mean, what are you blessing him for? What is there to bless for? I mean, your rent is up, your food is up, your gas is up, your standard of living is down, everything is more negative, and you're blessing Trump. Have you lost the ability to fucking think, critically? As he, Brandon is a cuckold. It's just insane that people are still supporting this madness. You know, he's nearly down at 20% approval. He's at 32%. By the end of this month, I predict Trump is going to be at 29% approval rating at the end of this month. Wow. Yeah. Look, Brian, why are you upset, Brian? Brian, why are you upset? Look at, I love that energy. Look, because they know. See, the thing is, you have to remember. There's a famous saying: first they ignore you, right? Then they laugh at you. Then they fight you. Notice they're all fighting now. Look, they come in here. They're all fighting. Oh, I'm gonna attack the atheist monk Undaldu. I'm gonna attack him for just speaking truth. Truth to power. You're being manipulated to fight. We're the same. We're on the same team. We are the meat bags. They're the vampires. They look at them as the vampire class. We're the meat bags, and you're defending the vampires. What were they called? What were they called? The individuals that are the humans that help the vampires. Isn't there a word for those guys? What's the word? What are they called? Right? What is it called? The flesh bags. Familiars. Yeah, familiars. Their MAGA are just the familiars of the MAGA of the fucking vampires. Thank you, James. The familiars. They're familiars. The vampires control their brain, where they're still saying God bless Trump. Familiars. Yeah. They have them on that. So it's just crazy. It's crazy that we're still fighting each other. That MAGA is still that Trump has anyone supporting him. You're a Don troll. Hassan, are you a MAGA masquerading as an Iranian? Maybe Hassan is pro-Iranian. Yeah, I don't know why Iran doesn't make dirty bombs. They could be making dirty bombs with this uranium. Dirty missiles. Start fucking throwing dirty missiles on Iran. Iran starts shooting dirty missiles at Israel, making the place uninhabitable. There you go. Throw some dirty missiles into Israel. That's what Iran should be doing. They should be shooting and let them blow them up at the sky, right? So they blow up the missile in the sky, and it's a dirty bomb. So all the radioactive shit is falling down on Israel. There you go. That's the way to deal with Israel. Just make the whole fucking place uninhabitable. That's my idea. They should just do it. Oh, you want like exploded over these villages that they're gonna. Oh yeah, live in a fucking toxic wasteland, Israel. Make the whole place toxic, so no one can live there. Make the whole place toxic. You know, that's the best solution. Just make it toxic for everyone. So yeah. Make it all toxic. It's like saying, I would be like, if I was Iran, I'd be like, hey, dirty bombs incoming. You either get the fuck out of my straits, or dirty bombs incoming. If Iran or anyone, Israel, if Israel attacks, dirty bombs, baby, dirty bombs incoming. Make dirty bombs. You don't need nuclear bombs. Just make them dirty. You know, make the whole fucking place. Have everyone fucking leaving Israel. Make it a destitute. Yeah. Oh, they all suck. They all suck. But what's going to happen is we're going to have, because fertilizer is up like 150%. So we're not going to feel it maybe this season, but next season. And what's going to happen is there's going to be massive starvation. Talk about killing babies. Trump's going to be killing babies. MAGA killing babies. There's going to be massive starvation globally. There's going to be massive food insecurity. That's going to cause massive amounts of population migrating. So you're talking about the undocumented. There's going to be massive amounts of undocumented coming into the United States through the South, everything else, because they have to. They're going to be starving. Yeah, the Lego AI videos are so good. What's up, G-Man? There you go. Let's watch a little Lego video. Here you go. Yeah, it's crazy. They're really kicking ass on the Lego videos. AI. They don't use stop motion anymore, dude. It's all AI. Just a Yeah, I mean the thing is too. Yeah, USAID was actually a subsidy for U.S. farmers. It paid for their crops, right? That were going to be sold. Not 100% of their crops is sold, right? So USAID was there to buy the crops that weren't being sold, right? Maybe the lower quality stuff on it. But things are going to. Let's see other comments here. Yeah, they are funny.
Iran isn't trying to beat America in a straight fight. They know they can't. So they're playing a completely different game. And honestly, it's working. Instead of going toe to toe with the US military, Iran's entire strategy is built around one idea: make this war so expensive and so painful that it's not worth fighting. Start with the missiles. Iran has the biggest missile stockpile in the entire Middle East. We're talking ballistic missiles that can hit targets 2,500 kilometers away. The Shahab 3, the Ahmad, the Sejil, names most people have never heard, but military planners lose sleep over. Then add cruise missiles like the Sumar and Hoveze with similar range. And their drone program has exploded in recent years. The play is simple. Launch everything in massive waves. You can't intercept all of them. Some are getting through, period. But here's where it gets really scary for everyday people. The Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through this tiny choke point. Iran? Yeah, but if you don't understand, 20% of oil, 30% of hydrogen, right? Or helium, whatever it is. Maybe it's helium, agriculture, plastics, all this stuff on this. Iran sits right on top of it. Anti-ship missiles, naval mines, fast attack boats, suicide drones. They can choke that strait whenever they want. And they've already started. Oil prices spiked. Global supply tanked. Some analysts are calling it the biggest disruption to oil markets in history. Yeah, it's like 40. It's like 4 times worse than when Saudi Arabia in 1973, which ties into our whole Epstein story. It's the irony that this shit ties into Epstein. And this shit ties into how everything started. They got this is for the drinks. Plastic. On there. How do you hold on? Yeah, because of the famine. The famine. That means higher. Many people, myself included. Iran isn't trying to beat America in a straight fight. They know they can't. So they're playing a completely different game. And honestly, it's working. Instead of going toe to toe with the US military, Iran's entire strategy is built around one idea: make this war so expensive and so painful that it's not worth fighting. Start with the missiles. Iran has the biggest missile stockpile in the entire Middle East. We're talking ballistic missiles that can hit targets 2,500 kilometers away. The Shahab 3, the Ahmad, the Sejil, names most people have never heard, but military planners lose sleep over. Then add cruise missiles like the Sumar and Hoveze with similar range. And their drone program has exploded in recent years. The play is simple. Launch everything in massive waves. You can't intercept all of them. Some are getting through, period. But here's where it gets really scary for everyday people. The Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through this tiny choke point. Iran sits right on top of it. Anti-ship missiles, naval mines, fast attack boats, suicide drones. They can choke that strait whenever they want. And they've already started. Oil prices spiked. Global supply tanked. Some analysts are calling it the biggest disruption to oil markets. That means higher gas prices, higher food prices, higher everything, hitting your wallet directly. And you can't just take out their leadership and call it a day.
Is this it? Yeah, this isn't it.
Nice, Mism.
Did you pay? Why did it leave so much hair? Why did you leave so much hair on your head? What? Huh? How much? 30. You need a change. Can't reach it. Go to the mass. Go to the free station. Huh? Free station.
Iran uses something called a decentralized mosaic fence. Basically, if you destroy the head, the body keeps fighting. Local commanders operate independently. Every region, every unit can keep going on its own. Oh, and they're not just fighting with missiles. Iran has serious cyber warfare capabilities, and operatives spread across the globe. Critical infrastructure, power grids, financial systems, all potential targets. So the bottom line is this: Iran doesn't need to win. They just need to make losing too expensive for everyone else. And the longer this drags out, the more the entire global economy feels it, starting with your bank account.
Exactly. Starting with your
Trying
bank
to beat
account.
America in a straight fight. They know they can't, so they're playing a completely different game. And honestly, it's working. Instead of going toe-to-toe with the US military, Iran's entire strategy is built around one idea: make this war so expensive and so painful that it's not worth fighting. Start with the missiles. Iran has the biggest missile stockpile in the entire Middle East. We're talking ballistic missiles that can hit targets 2,500 kilometers away. The Shahab 3, the Ahmad, the Sejil, names most people have never heard, but military planners lose sleep over. Then add cruise missiles like the Sumar and Hoveze with similar range. And their drone program has exploded in recent years. The play is simple: launch in massive waves. You can't intercept all of them. Some are getting through, period. But here's where it gets really scary for everyday people: the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through this tiny choke point. Iran sits right on top of it. Anti-ship missiles, naval mines, fast attack boats, suicide drones. They can choke that strait whenever they want. And they've already started. Oil prices spiked. Global supply tanked. Some analysts are calling it the biggest disruption to oil markets in history. That means higher gas prices, higher food prices, higher everything, hitting your wallet directly. And you can't just take out their leadership and call it a day. Iran uses something called a decentralized mosaic defense. Basically, if you destroy the head, the body keeps fighting. Local commanders operate independently. Every region, every unit can keep going on its own. Oh, and they're not just fighting with missiles. Iran has serious cyber warfare capabilities, and operatives spread across the globe. Critical infrastructure, power grids, financial systems, all potential targets. So the bottom line is this: Iran doesn't need to win. They just need to make losing too expensive for everyone else.
See, that's what no one is addressing. And I don't know why we didn't address this at the Hegstedt. Is Iran doesn't need to win a war. They just need to make it too expensive to fight. And that's exactly what they're doing. And us, blockading them, we are spending $1 billion a day for those carriers to be out there. You know, that's money that could be going to education, be going to homeless, be going to, to making America great again. No new wars. It really is insane that, this is what it's come down to. you know, so deep. I wonder if I think it's going to hit to $5. $5 gas coming this month, which reminds me I got to go get gas. Who's my favorite sushi restaurant coming up here?
I don't care what you're doing. You need to stop and listen to this interview. It's mind blowing. Like, it's absolutely.
The big question is how do we, how do we overcome this? I mean, how do we? I think that the only solution is revolution. Revolution is the only solution at this stage. Look at this guy here. What are you gonna do? You got to pull out in front of me. Revolution is the only solution. These billionaires are not going to give up control. I want you to discuss the asymmetric war that Iran is perpetuating, and it's all about just simply bankrupting America. I want you to lay that out factually, support it with information.
The concept of Iran using asymmetric warfare to impose heavy financial, military, and political costs on the United States and its allies is a central theme in modern geopolitical analysis. Rather than engaging in a direct conventional conflict, which it would likely lose, Tehran utilizes high leverage, low cost methods to force its adversaries into expensive, prolonged engagements. While the primary goal of Iran's strategy is typically viewed as regime survival, regional dominance, and the expulsion of U.S. forces from the Middle East, the economic exhaustion of the United States is a highly effective byproduct. 1. The cost imbalance, cheap attacks, expensive defenses. The most direct way Iran's asymmetric strategy impacts the U.S. financially is through the massive discrepancy between the cost of offensive weapons used by Iranian proxies and the defensive measures the U.S. must deploy to counter them. Low-cost offensive tech. Iran has mastered the production and distribution of cheap, disposable technology. Shahad. 136 drones cost between $20,000 and $40,000 each to produce. Improvised explosive devices, IEDs, and basic artillery rockets cost only a few hundred to a few $1,000s. High-cost defensive
I'm not going. I'm going to stop at a store that's on my left. Why would I stop on a store that's on my right?
Firing a Standard Missile-2, SM-2, or SM-6 from a Navy destroyer to take down a Houthi drone or missile in the Red Sea cost between $2.1 million and $4.3 million per shot. Even shorter range interceptors, like those used in the Patriot system, cost around $3 million to $4 million per missile. The math: if a proxy group fires $10,000-$20,000 drones, the offensive cost is $200,000. For the U.S. to shoot them down, the defensive cost can easily exceed $20 million. 2. Weaponizing global trade and supply chains. Iran leverages its geographic position and proxy network to disrupt global commerce, forcing the U.S. to take on the expensive role of guaranteeing freedom of navigation. The Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Through the Houthi movement in Yemen, Iran-backed forces have disrupted one of the world's most vital maritime trade routes: Suez Canal diversions. Major shipping companies have repeatedly diverted vessels around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. This adds 10 to 14 days of travel time, massively increases fuel costs, and drives up global insurance premiums. U.S. security costs. To counter this, the U.S. launched Operation Prosperity Guardian, keeping a carrier strike group and several guided missile destroyers operating continuously in high-threat waters costs the Pentagon tens of millions millions of dollars a week in fuel, maintenance, and combat pay. 3. The gray zone strategy and military overstretch. Iran operates effectively in the gray zone, the space between peace and open war. By keeping conflicts localized and utilizing proxies, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, various militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen, Tehran avoids triggering a full-scale U.S. military response while still bleeding U.S. resources, forcing constant readiness. Because proxy attacks are unpredictable, the U.S. must maintain a massive permanent footprint in the Middle East. This includes Patriot missile batteries, fighter jet squadrons, and naval assets. Sustained operational costs. Maintaining these forces in a high alert posture incurs massive wear and tear on military hardware, accelerating the need for expensive repairs and early equipment replacement. 4.
Yeah,
Does
you're
it
also
bankrupt America? While this strategy places a significant
well, you're also missing the fact that the helium for compute, agriculture, all the plastics, all the urea for fertilizer, you know, this isn't, everyone always conflates, oh, gasoline, jet fuel, all these other things, the impact globally, the fact that Japan, 95%, they have massive stockpiles, but other countries do not. You're missing a part. It isn't just about bankrupting America. It's about bringing down the whole global economy.
That is a critical correction, and it moves the conversation from a purely military financial dynamic to a global systemic vulnerability. When the conversation focuses solely on crude oil or gasoline prices, it misses the far more dangerous underbelly of the global economy, the byproducts of oil and gas extraction that serve as the foundational inputs for modern civilization. If Iran successfully chokes off the Persian Gulf, specifically the Strait of Hormuz, the target isn't just America's military budget. It is the industrial, agricultural, and technological life support systems of the global economy. Here is a factual breakdown of the specific material vulnerabilities that demonstrate exactly how this asymmetric pressure threatens to crash global systems. 1. The real threat, choke points and petrochemical foundations. While the U.S. has achieved relative energy independence in terms of crude oil, key allies like Japan, which imports about 95% of its petroleum products, and South Korea, are entirely reliant on uninterrupted passage through the Strait of Hormuz. However, the real catastrophic risk lies in the non-fuel byproducts of petroleum and natural gas. Helium for compute and high-tech manufacturing. Helium is not just for balloons. It is an irreplaceable cooling agent in high-tech manufacturing. Why it matters. Helium is used to cool the superconducting magnets in MRI machines and is absolutely vital in semiconductor chip manufacturing to maintain ultra-precise temperatures during the etching process. The Gulf Connection. Qatar is the world's second largest producer of helium, accounting for roughly 30% to 35% of global supply. Every molecule of that helium must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Global impact. A severe blockade or prolonged conflict stops Qatari exports, immediately throttling advanced chip fabrication plants, fabs, in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and the US, effectively paralyzing global tech and computing infrastructure. B. Urea.
Am I turning here or straight?
Agriculture. Fertilizer.
Huh?
The
Is it
global
here?
food supply depends on the Haber-Bosch process, WIMI, which converts natural gas into ammonia, the base ingredient for urea and nitrogen-based fertilizers. Why it matters. Without these fertilizers, global crop yields would drop by an estimated 50% almost immediately, triggering severe food shortages. The Gulf Connection, the Persian Gulf region, led by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Iran itself, is a massive exporter of both natural gas and finished fertilizer products like urea. Global impact. Cutting off the supply doesn't just raise food prices, it creates immediate acute agricultural crises across developing nations that lack the financial reserves to compete for scarce supplies on the spot market. See plastics and industrial polymers. Petroleum and natural gas liquids, like ethane and propane, are cracked into ethylene and propylene, the building blocks for virtually all modern plastics, medical devices, packaging, and industrial resins. Why it matters. Modern logistics, consumer goods, food preservation, and medical supply chains cannot function without these polymers. Global impact. While the U.S. has its own shale-derived petrochemical industry, the loss of Middle Eastern petrochemical feedstock disrupts the intricate global manufacturing networks that turn raw plastic into essential components. 2. The vulnerability of global just-in-time supply chains. The global economy operates on a just-in-time (JIT) inventory model, which maximizes efficiency but leave zero margin for error. Stockpiles are uneven. While countries like Japan maintain strategic reserves of crude oil to survive short-term disruptions, most nations do not have strategic reserves for helium, urea, or industrial polymers. The bullwhip effect. A 10% disruption in the supply of a foundational input like helium or fertilizer does not lead to a 10% price increase. It leads to a catastrophic cascade where industries shut down entirely because they cannot source a single critical component. The true asymmetric leverage. Iran understands that it does not need to destroy the US military. By threatening the Strait of Hormuz, it holds hostage the inputs that feed the world, keep medical equipment running, and manufacture the microchips driving modern civilization. 3. Systemic economic contagion. By focusing the asymmetric strategy on these foundational inputs, the ultimate target becomes the stability of global trade and financial systems. 1. Unbearable insurance rates. Even without a total physical blockade, the mere threat of missile or drone attacks causes maritime insurance premiums to skyrocket, making shipping economically unviable for many operators. 2. Global inflation and interest rates. Supply shocks in agriculture, fertilizer, and manufacturing, plastics and compute, trigger immediate inflation. Central banks are forced to hike interest rates, slowing down global growth and risking a widespread debt crisis. 3. Allied fracturing. If Japan, South Korea, and Western Europe face a total shutdown of their high-tech and industrial sectors due to a Gulf blockade, their political will to support long-term U.S. military engagements in the region evaporates. By disrupting the physical flow of these highly specific, non-substitutable resources, the asymmetric strategy shifts from a simple military conflict into a profound threat to the complex, interdependent global economy.
I want you to talk about the recorded shortfalls we currently have based on the latest data. I believe it's 1.5 billion to 2 billion shortfall in crude. I believe the last Strait closure tankers, super tankers, now have reached their destinations, and now we are in shortfall. And I want you also to talk about how this is going to impact, based on data, the food shortages in places like Africa, that potentially is going to lead to greater population movements. How this event is going to potentially cascade, apply game theory, apply whatever research. I want you to deep dive, find the facts, find the actual data, support your output with actual data that's available.
The global economy is entering an unprecedented supply crunch. The arrival of the final pre-closure Very Large Crude Carriers, VLCCs, at their destination ports in Asia, Europe, and North America marks the end of the buffer period. The transit time from the Persian Gulf to major global ports typically takes between 30 to 45 days. With those tankers now fully discharged, the physical reality of the Strait of Hormuz disruption is hitting the global market. 1. The global crude shortfall. By the numbers. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most critical oil choke point, normally facilitating the transit of roughly 20.5 million barrels per day, BPD, of crude oil, condensate, and petroleum products. This represents approximately 20% of global petroleum consumption. The math of the deficit. With the closure cutting off this transit route, the math has quickly shifted from a theoretical shock to a physical reality. The 1.5 to 2 billion barrel depletion curve. Total global commercial oil inventories, including OECD stocks and floating storage, sit at approximately 2.7 to 2.8 billion barrels. With a direct physical shortfall of roughly 15 to 18 million barrels of oil per day, factoring in limited volumes diverted via pipelines across Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea, the global economy is burning through its inventories at a rate of roughly 450 to 540 million barrels per month. The supply gap. Within 90 to 120 days of a sustained closure, global inventories dropped by 1.5 to 2 billion barrels, dragging commercial stocks to near zero and leaving the world dependent on government-controlled strategic petroleum reserves, SPR. Immediate downstream consequences. Refinery starvation. Refining complexes in Japan, South Korea, India, and China are built specifically to process heavy and medium sour crudes from the Middle East. Light sweet crude from the US or West Africa cannot easily replace these blends without reducing refinery utilization by 20 to 30%. The finished product crunch. This creates an immediate shortfall in diesel, essential for freight and agriculture, and jet fuel, immediately raising the operational costs of food. 2. The cascade into Africa. Fertilizer, food, and famine. The disruption of the Persian Gulf extends far beyond the gas pump. The most acute human crisis is emerging in Africa, driven by the collapse of the agricultural input supply chain. A. The fertilizer shock. Modern agricultural yields rely completely on synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, which are synthesized from natural gas via the Haber-Bosch process. Middle East dominance. The Persian Gulf region accounts for a massive share of global exports of urea and anhydrous ammonia. Qatar and Saudi Arabia are foundational suppliers of nitrogenous inputs. Price spikes and shortages. With the Strait closed, global fertilizer prices spiked by 200 to 300%. For commercial farmers in East and Sub-Saharan Africa, fertilizer is either completely unavailable or priced out of reach. Yield collapse. Data from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, suggests that a 50% drop in fertilizer application in regions like the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, and East Africa leads to an immediate 30% to 40% reduction in local cereal production, maize, wheat, and sorghum, in the subsequent harvest season. B. The direct food import deficit. Africa is a net importer of staple foods. The double squeeze. African nations are simultaneously hit by the loss of direct imports from the Middle East and hyperinflation in the global shipping sector due to high diesel prices, wheat and grain inflation. As major producers elsewhere divert their grain to wealthier nations that can afford to outbid the market, food prices in parts of Africa are soaring past the purchasing power of the average citizen. 3. Game theory and cascading effects, from shortfalls to population movements. To understand how this crisis cascades into mass migration, we can apply the principles of game theory, specifically looking at how individual actors, nations, and regional populations respond to survival threats when resources are scarce. Persian Gulf disruption, filled down pointing triangle. Energy and fertilizer supply shock, filled down pointing triangle. Collapse in agricultural yields and direct food shortages, filled down pointing triangle. Sovereign default / subsistence crisis, filled down pointing triangle. Mass demographic flight and conflict, the tragedy of the commons. Phase 1, sovereign competition, the prisoner's dilemma. In a world with a 1.5 to 2 billion barrel oil shortfall and a parallel fertilizer collapse, the dominant strategy for every wealthy nation is resource hoarding. Instead of cooperating to distribute the remaining supply to vulnerable regions, which would minimize the global humanitarian crisis, major economies outbid developing nations for every available barrel of West African or Latin American oil and every shipment of North American fertilizer. Africa is effectively priced out of the global market. Phase 2, the domestic collapse, the stag hunt. Within vulnerable nations, domestic stability depends on the state's ability to subsidize fuel and food. The payoff matrix fails. When the cost to subsidize exceeds sovereign reserves, governments face a choice: default on international debt or let domestic prices float. Social unrest. Hyperinflation in transportation and food costs triggers the breakdown of internal supply chains. Urban areas face acute food shortages within weeks, as commercial truckers cannot afford diesel to bring food from rural areas. Phase 3, the tragedy of the commons, mass migration. At the individual level, the dominant strategy for survival shifts from local adaptation to demographic flight. Regional destabilization. In areas like the Sahel, severe drought coupled with the fertilizer / food deficit makes subsistence farming untenable. The push factor. When food and water security fall below survival thresholds, populations have no rational choice but to move. This initiates mass population movements toward more stable urban centers first, and then cross-border toward northern Africa and Europe. The pull factor. These movements put severe pressure on the resources of transit countries, e.g., Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, destabilizing them in turn and triggering a secondary wave of migration. Summary of the cascading timeline. Let me try that again. The global economy.
No, something you didn't talk about is actually revolutions, other people competing. I mean, that's also something that's going to happen. We're going to have far more radicalization, ethnic cleansing. People, one way to deal with shortfalls is to eliminate mouths. Explain.
When resource scarcity reaches existential levels, the internal political dynamics of vulnerable nations change completely. In a landscape defined by severe shortfalls of crude oil, fertilizer, and staple grains, survival is no longer just about economic competition between states. It becomes a brutal domestic struggle within states. The historical and geopolitical reality is that when there are not enough resources to keep a whole population alive, Governments and competing factions pivot toward high-stakes, zero-sum strategies. Below is an analysis of how extreme resource shortfalls trigger internal revolutions, radicalization, and the catastrophic emergence of ethnic cleansing as a mechanism of resource allocation. 1. The economics of eliminating mouths, scarcity, and violence. In extreme, prolonged crises, the basic math of human survival overrides the social contract. If a nation's food and fuel supply is permanently reduced by 30% to 50%, and it lacks the financial capital to import alternatives, the state or its competing factions face a terrifying mathematical problem. There are two primary ways societies historically balance a resource deficit: A, triage and structural violence. The governing elite redirects the remaining resources exclusively to the groups required to keep them in power: the military, the police, and the capital city's dominant ethnic political class. The outgroup starvation. By withholding fuel subsidies, grain, and medical supplies from peripheral regions or minority populations, the state silently uses administrative neglect as a weapon. The goal: the regime maintains stability within its core support base while allowing the vulnerable peripheral population to bear the brunt of the mortality and displacement. B. Ethnic cleansing and forced displacement. When triage is not enough to guarantee stability, structural neglect often escalates into active violence. Zero-sum resource maps. If fertile land, fresh water, or the remaining stockpiles of fertilizer are scarce, the dominant group has a rational incentive, in terms of raw survival, to violently expel competing ethnic or social groups. Depopulation as a strategy. Expelling a minority group from a river valley or agricultural zone achieves two goals for the aggressor. It eliminates competing mouths, drawing from the local resource pool, and it consolidates the remaining arable land for the dominant group's exclusive use. 2. The mechanics of radicalization and revolution. When the state can no longer provide basic security or sustenance, it loses its legitimacy. This creates a power vacuum that is rapidly filled by radical movements. State capacity collapses, filled down, pointing triangle. Loss of basic food/energy subsidies, filled down, pointing triangle. Radical insurgencies offer alternative survival networks, filled down, pointing triangle. Violent overthrow of the state. Revolution/civil war. A. The failure of the social contract. In many developing nations, political stability relies on a basic bargain. The population tolerates authoritarianism or corruption in exchange for heavily subsidized bread, cooking oil, and fuel. When a global supply shock makes these subsidies economically impossible, the bargain shatters overnight. B. Radical ideology as a survival mechanism. In the resulting chaos, moderate political options disappear. Moderate leaders cannot solve a physical shortage of fertilizer or grain. The appeal of extremism, radical groups, whether based on religious extremism, ultranationalism, or militant Marxist ideologies, thrive in these conditions because they offer absolute certainty and a clear enemy to blame. The insurgency as a food supplier. Often, the faction that wins a civil war or revolution is simply the one that manages to seize control of the local grain silos, diesel depots, or international aid distribution points. Joining a radical militia becomes the only way for a young person to secure food for their family. 3. Geopolitical cascades. The domino effect of regional collapse. When a nation collapses into revolution or ethnic violence over food and fuel, the crisis immediately spills over its borders, triggering a chain reaction across neighboring regions. The contagion of civil war. When a state like Sudan, Ethiopia, or Nigeria experiences massive internal conflict, the violence rarely stays contained. Cross-border ethnic links. Ethnic groups cross arbitrary colonial borders. A dominant group attacking a minority group in one country frequently draws in co-ethnics from a neighboring country, threatening to pull entire regions into a synchronized multi-state war. Safe havens and arms flows. Revolutionary movements and insurgencies use the destabilized borders of neighboring states to smuggle weapons, fuel, and black market resources, accelerating the breakdown of law and order across the entire continent. B. Weaponized migration. As populations flee ethnic cleansing and war, neighboring countries, already struggling with their own food and energy shortfalls, find themselves overwhelmed by millions of refugees. Political destabilization of host nations. The sudden arrival of a massive, desperate population places impossible demands on the host country's remaining food, water, and power infrastructure. The xenophobic feedback loop. This strain triggers a secondary wave of radicalization within the host country. Local populations, fearing their own survival, elect ultra-nationalist regimes that promise to violently repel the refugees. This sets off a brutal cycle of border violence and further humanitarian catastrophes. Summary of the existential spiral. In a world where the fundamental inputs of industrial civilization, energy, fertilizer, and petrochemicals are severely constrained, the ultimate consequence is not just an economic depression. It is the regression of the international order toward tribalism, where survival is dictated by the control of raw resources and the violent exclusion of others. Hang on, actually, let me start over. When resource scarcity reaches existential levels, the internal political dynamics of vulnerable nations change completely. In a landscape defined by severe shortfalls of crude oil, fertilizer, and staple grains, survival is no longer just about economic competition between states. It becomes a brutal domestic struggle within states. The historical and geopolitical reality is that when there are not enough resources to keep a whole population alive, governments and competing factions pivot toward high-stakes, zero-sum strategies. Below is an analysis of how extreme resource shortfalls trigger internal revolutions, radicalization, and the catastrophic emergence of ethnic cleansing as a mechanism of resource allocation. 1. The economics of eliminating mouths, scarcity, and violence. In extreme, prolonged crises, the basic math of human survival overrides the social contract. If a nation's food and fuel supply is permanently reduced by 30% to 50%, and it lacks the financial capital to import alternatives, the state or its competing factions face a terrifying mathematical problem. There are two primary ways societies historically balance a resource deficit: A, triage, and structural violence. The governing elite redirects the remaining resources exclusively to the groups required to keep them in power: the military, the police, and the capital city's dominant ethnic or political class. The outgroup starvation. By withholding fuel subsidies, grain, and medical supplies from peripheral regions or minority populations, the state silently uses administrative neglect as a weapon. The goal: the regime maintains stability within its core support base while allowing the vulnerable peripheral population to bear the brunt of the mortality and displacement. B. Ethnic cleansing and forced displacement. When triage is not enough to guarantee stability, structural neglect often escalates into active violence. Zero-sum resource grabs. If fertile land, fresh water, or the remaining stockpiles of fertilizer are scarce, the dominant group has a rational incentive, in terms of raw survival, to violently expel competing ethnic or social groups. Depopulation as a strategy. Expelling a minority group from a river valley or agricultural zone achieves two goals for the aggressor. It eliminates competing mouths, drawing from the local resource pool, and it consolidates the remaining arable land for the dominant group's exclusive use. 2. The mechanics of radicalization and revolution. When the
What
state
are they
can
doing?
no longer
Japanese
provide basic security or
pumping
sustenance,
gas in
it
Japan.
loses its legitimacy. This creates a power vacuum that is rapidly filled by radical movements. State capacity collapses, filled down, pointing triangle. Loss of basic food/energy subsidies, filled down, pointing triangle. Radical insurgencies offer alternative survival networks, filled down, pointing triangle. Violent overthrow of the state, revolution/civil war. A. The failure of the social contract. In many developing nations, political stability relies on a basic bargain. The population tolerates authoritarianism or corruption in exchange for heavily subsidized bread, cooking oil, and fuel. When a global supply shock makes these subsidies economically impossible, the bargain shatters overnight. B. Radical ideology as a survival mechanism. In the resulting chaos, moderate political options disappear. Moderate leaders cannot solve a physical shortage of fertilizer or grain. The appeal of extremism, radical groups, whether based on religious extremism, ultranationalism, or militant Marxist ideologies, thrive in these conditions because they offer absolute certainty and a clear enemy to blame. The insurgency as a food supplier. Often, the faction that
500
wins a
yen
civil
off.
war or revolution is simply the one that manages to seize control of the local grain silos, diesel depots, or international aid distribution points. Joining a radical militia becomes the only way for a young person to secure food for their family. 3. Geopolitical cascades. The domino effect of regional collapse. When a nation collapses into revolution or ethnic violence over food and fuel, the crisis immediately spills over its borders, triggering a chain reaction across neighboring regions. A. The contagion of civil war. When a state like Sudan, Ethiopia, or Nigeria experiences massive internal conflict, the violence rarely stays contained. Cross-border ethnic links. Ethnic groups cross arbitrary colonial borders. A dominant group attacking a minority group in one country frequently draws in co-ethnics from a neighboring country, threatening to pull entire regions into a synchronized multi-state war. Safe havens and arms flows. Revolutionary movements and insurgencies use the destabilized borders of neighboring states to smuggle weapons, fuel, and black market resources, accelerating the breakdown of law and order across the entire continent. B. Weaponized migration. As populations flee ethnic cleansing and war, neighboring countries, already struggling with their own food and energy shortfalls, find themselves overwhelmed by millions of refugees. Political destabilization of host nations. The sudden arrival of a massive, desperate population places impossible demands on the host country's remaining food, water, and power infrastructure. The xenophobic feedback loop. This drain triggers a secondary wave of radicalization within the host country. Local populations, fearing their own survival, elect ultra-nationalist regimes that promise to violently repel the refugees. This sets off a brutal cycle of border violence and further humanitarian catastrophes. Summary of the existential spiral. In a world where the fundamental inputs of industrial civilization, energy, fertilizer, and petrochemicals are severely constrained, the ultimate consequence is not just an economic depression. It is the regression of the international order toward tribalism, where survival is dictated by the control of resources
paying
and
with
the violent
cash is
exclusion of
cheaper.
others. When the pie shrinks beyond a certain point, the competition
You
changes
you
from who gets
you
the largest
save
slice
money.
to who is allowed to remain at the table.
You could argue, in many respects, Trump is that radicalization in America. His xenophobia, the assault, ICE, all of this is a product, and now he's exporting this nationally and compounding the problem by the Iran war. Think critically, apply, chain of thought, chain of reasoning to this. Maybe even apply first principles. How America really is destroying itself with this action.
To evaluate whether this internal political shift and the external conflict with Iran represent a self-destructive feedback loop for the United States, we can strip the situation down to first principles by looking at the foundational pillars that sustain American hegemony and examining how domestic policy and foreign conflict interact. We can trace the chain of reasoning that points to a systemic breakdown. The first principles of American power. To understand how a system destroys itself, we must first define what keeps it functioning. American global dominance rests on three primary pillars. 1. The reserve currency and financial hegemony, the dollar. The world uses the US dollar for trade, especially oil, which allows the US to run massive deficits and print money without triggering immediate hyperinflation. 2. Global alliance networks, trust and security. Alliances in Europe and Asia ensure that major economies align with US interests in exchange for military protection and access to open trade routes. 3. Domestic stability and innovation, demographics and social cohesion. A continuous influx of global talent and a stable domestic legal and political system drive the high-tech, agricultural, and industrial capacity of the country. The chain of reasoning, the internal and external feedback loop. When we apply a chain of thought to the current dynamic, we can see how domestic political radicalization and the conflict with Iran act as compounding forces that directly degrade these three pillars. Step 1. Internal policy and the erosion of the domestic pillar. Domestic policies centered on extreme nationalism, aggressive deportation via ICE, and protectionism are designed to protect the domestic working class. However, when viewed through the lens of economic inputs, they create severe internal bottlenecks. Labor shock. The U.S. agricultural, construction, and food processing sectors rely heavily on immigrant labor. Drastic reductions in this workforce trigger immediate supply-side constraints. Input costs rise. With fewer workers, the cost of producing food in America spikes. This happens at the exact same time that global fertilizer prices are soaring due to the Middle East conflict, compounding the domestic cost of living crisis. Step 2. External conflict and the fragility of hegemony. Simultaneously, the aggressive posture toward Iran and the resulting maritime disruptions in the Persian Gulf place direct stress on the international pillars of U.S. power. The alliance tax. As the U.S. engages in or backs a high-friction conflict with Iran, key allies like Japan, South Korea, and Western Europe pay the price through lost energy, helium, and petrochemical inputs. Loss of faith. When the U.S. cannot guarantee the safety of global supply chains, or when its policies actively cause them to freeze, allies begin to view the U.S. security umbrella not as a benefit, but as a liability. This accelerates their search for strategic autonomy, weakening the global alliance network. Step 3. De-dollarization and the ultimate feedback loop. The most critical first principle vulnerability for the United States is the status of the dollar. Sanctions overreach, using the SWIFT banking system and aggressive sanctions to isolate Iran, Russia, and other adversaries, forces these nations to build alternative financial systems. The non-dollar trade. When the Middle East is destabilized and the U.S. enters a period of severe domestic inflation, major resource buyers like
status as the uncontested global reserve currency, it can no longer monetize its massive national debt. The US is forced to face its financial reality, pay for its military and domestic programs out of actual tax revenue, which leads to immediate, severe domestic austerity. How the system eats itself, the argument that America is eating itself, is supported by this systemic cascade. The domestic political response to economic anxiety is to push for protectionism and internal crackdowns. However, this domestic response weakens the very economic foundations, labor availability, manufacturing inputs, and agricultural costs required to project power abroad. To maintain its global standing despite domestic weakening, the US leans more heavily on aggressive foreign policy, such as confronting Iran. This confrontation further disrupts global supply chains, alienates allies, and incentivizes the world to move away from the US dollar. Domestic economic anxiety greater than. Aggressive nationalism/protectionism, filled up pointing triangle, filled down pointing triangle. Weakened global currency and power, less than destabilized global supply chains. Hang on, sorry. Let me try that again.
Talk about, we already seen the move from the dollar to the digidollar. Talk about the Genius Act. Talk about how China has built a goal to their currency rails, digital rails, right? In order to buy their currency, you have to actually deposit gold or something, right? They don't use dollar or anything else, I believe. I may be wrong. And talk about how the ploy is for issuing the new U.S. digidollar as a way to get away from the global the dollar and have it apply to all businesses can become issuers or whatever. Fix what I'm telling you, and find the pattern of what we're discussing.
The pattern we are uncovering here is the fragmentation of global financial architecture away from the legacy, SWIFT-based US dollar system toward a multipolar network of competing digital and asset-backed rails. To clear up the specifics, let's break down the exact mechanics of China's digital currency moves, look at the legislative concepts behind the US digital dollar initiatives, and analyze how this new landscape operates. 1. China's digital currency rails, the gold connection. To understand China's moves, it helps to distinguish between its central bank digital currency, CBDC, known as the ECNY digital yuan, and its cross-border infrastructure, the myth versus the reality of the gold-backed yuan. It is a common belief that China has created a currency backed by gold to bypass the US dollar. In practice, China's central bank does not allow you to directly convert digital yuan into physical gold on demand. However, there is a distinct and deliberate gold-to-currency rail built into their broader strategy. The Shanghai Gold Exchange, SGE, and International Board China, has spent the last several years expanding its domestic gold market. Non-Chinese institutions can trade gold on the SGE using offshore yuan, CNH. This creates a direct mechanism where a country exporting resources to China, such as oil or fertilizer, can take payment in yuan and immediately convert that yuan into physical gold in Shanghai. Bypassing the dollar completely, this is the crucial part. If an oil producer can sell oil to Beijing for yuan and then immediately buy gold on the Shanghai exchange, they never have to touch a US dollar, hold US Treasury debt, or route a single cent through the US-controlled banking system. The mBridge project. To facilitate this, China has led the development of mBridge E, a multi-CBDC cross-border payment platform, alongside the UAE, Thailand, Hong Kong, and Saudi Arabia. mBridge creates peer-to-peer digital rails where central banks can settle trade directly without using SWIFT, leaving the US with zero visibility or control over the transactions. 2. The US dynamic, the tokenization of the dollar, and the Genius Act concept. The transition of the US dollar into a digital format involves a major philosophical and economic debate within Washington. Should the digital dollar be issued by the Federal Reserve, or should private businesses be authorized to issue tokenized dollars? The concept of decentralized issuance. You mentioned the idea that all businesses can become issuers. This aligns with the push for stablecoin and tokenization legislation in the United States, which seeks to formalize how digital dollars are minted, private stablecoins versus a Fed CBDC. There has been strong political resistance in the US toward a Federal Reserve-issued digital dollar due to privacy concerns. Instead, the leading American strategy favors regulating private entities like Circle or Tether and major financial institutions to issue tokenized digital dollars backed one-to-one by high-quality liquid assets like short-term U.S. treasuries. The goal of the legislative concepts like the ones debated around stablecoin regulation, aim to create a clear legal framework. If any regulated bank, payment processor, or qualifying financial business can legally issue stablecoins, tokenized digital dollars, the U.S. can export its monetary influence directly onto global blockchains. 3. Deploy tokenized hegemony versus the multipolar system. The pattern you are pointing out reveals a fundamental strategic pivot by the United States to preserve its financial dominance by digitizing its currency, while other powers construct a parallel system to escape it. The U.S. pivot, blockchains as the new SWIFT. By allowing regulated businesses to issue tokenized dollars, the U.S. seeks to embed the dollar directly into modern, decentralized payment systems. The benefit: if the global economy moves to peer-to-peer digital trade, the U.S. wants to ensure the dominant currency used on those rails remains the tokenized dollar. The catch: even on a digital rail, a tokenized dollar is still tied to U.S. monetary policy and can still be blocked or frozen by the issuer. The counter strategy: hard assets and alternative rails. This is exactly why nations like China, Russia, and their BRICS Plus partners are moving in the opposite direction. They recognize that a digital or tokenized US dollar still carries the risk of US sanctions. The non-fiat reserve. To counter the US digital dollar, these countries are increasing their physical gold reserves and linking them to their own trade networks. Direct asset settlement. Instead of trading in fiat currency, digital or physical, the ultimate goal for these parallel networks is settling trade using regional currencies that are either directly linked to or convertible into a basket of hard commodities: gold, oil, or strategic minerals. The competing financial realities feature the Western model, US digital dollar; the Eastern model, China/mBridge/gold rails, primary rail, public and private blockchains, Ethereum, Solana, etc., multi-CBDC networks, mBridge, and regional clearing systems. Asset backing, one-to-one backed by US treasuries and cash reserves, backed by local sovereign credit, with mechanisms to convert to physical gold. Ultimate goal: maintain dollar dominance by digitizing the legacy financial system. Create a sanctions-proof, independent trade network for hard commodities.
All right. We have to check on my garden. All right. I think my tomatoes need to be folded over. We'll check my tomatoes that are growing in my yard. Picking up weeds, tearing them down. All this grass growing up here. Big clumps of glass. So we got these strawberries to eat. Potatoes. Flowers here. Look at that ant. The ant found a larva. Look at it. Look at it taking it. Here you go, girl. Let's check this out here. Do I have any strawberries? I haven't been out here in a while. Any strawberries? Hello? Oh, look at this here. God damn it. Ants. These are ants eating my fucking strawberries. What can I put? They are sweet. They are sweet. Maybe I... Look at that guy.
something. You know, I have this cover here to stop fucking shit from eating it. God damn, they're good. It's a pretty strawberry. Mmm. Look. I gotta pick them like this. Oh, this guy got completely eaten. They're so sweet. Here's another one. Nice one. Here's another one. See, look at these guys. My little roly-polies in there. Guess I just gotta pick them when they're like that. Let's go get a... Oh, something got in there and let them ripen up, you know, at the house. That's nice. God damn, look at that one. That's nice. Get off of there, you little fuck turd. I need a bag. God damn it. Hate using. Let's find a... All right. Let's go. I got a bag. Let's pick these guys now and let them ripen up in the house. Brian, dude. Brian love Trump. He love pedos. Pedos love pedos. Of course. If you're a pedo, you love a pedo. Really. There's one. Pick all these strawberries. How do you fight the little earworms? There's this guy right here. Look at that. Big old strawberry. Got fucked. Here's some strawberries. There's a big one. That's a nice looking one right there. Let's get off of this damn. Mm.
Lettuce looks good.
Lettuce. Should where's my knife? Hold on one second. All right. Harvested strawberries. These guys here. These guys will be folded over. Need two hands. Something I didn't think about. I don't know if I do these today. Got to replant these tomatoes. All right, let's see. I don't know if I could do it this way. You know what? This way. I'll do that like this. All right, let's go. All right, let's go. About there. All right, so I put some tomatoes there. I bent over those tomatoes there. Picked up some strawberries. Let's get out of here. I'm gonna leave these over. You know, I don't know what to do with the strawberries. I need to put some sort of insect repellent. I don't know what though. Look at that little guy. Ants. Maybe cinnamon. Put cinnamon down. Maybe I need to put cinnamon down. I don't know. Potatoes looking good. Maybe about 30 kilos worth of potatoes again. This guy. Oh look, it's finally leafing. This is my persimmon. He tried to cut it down. I'll try to save it. We'll see if that thing fruits. Every time I come, pull up grass. Little clumps of black grass. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here. Oh, I didn't put on my overalls. Woo, hot. Cool out there. Really? Yeah, you gotta capture your own water. I capture my own water. You gotta put in water capture systems. Guys, if you're gonna garden, you gotta capture your own. You gotta be off the grid. Especially water now, it's gonna go up even more. God damn it. I need to go this way. On there. Yeah, I don't have any water on this thing. Everything is captured. I capture water. You got to bury like the tomatoes. You got to do deep root planting tomatoes.
You should plant something. Just every time you eat an onion, plant an onion. Every time you eat garlic, plant garlic. You just stick shit into the planter box. Put it on your windowsill. You eat garlic, you cut the bottom of the garlic, you break up the bottom of the garlic, and you stick it in the soil. And then you got chives. All right, Aaron. Oh, man. All right, let's go home. Let's go home. I want you to apply Jeremy Rifkin. I want you to apply the 1973 Saudi oil embargo. I want you to also apply the credit default swaps collapse due to, according to Alan Rifkin, about high crude prices being the trigger. And I want you to break it down on how how things are far worse than they are in 1973, right? Do a compare contrast, and then with that game theory out, what expectations do we have? How high is potentially gas prices going to go if we apply those three metrics to our current situation?
To understand the sheer magnitude of our current geopolitical and economic crisis, we can weave together three distinct lenses: Jeremy Rifkin's theories on energy transitions, the historical precedent of the 1973 Saudi oil embargo, and the economic research, often highlighted by energy economists like James Hamilton and echoed by theorists like Rifkin, regarding how high oil prices triggered the 2008 subprime mortgage and credit default swap (CDS) collapse. When you combine these three frameworks, it becomes clear why the current situation is far more dangerous than 1973. 1. The three theoretical lenses. A. Jeremy Rifkin. The sunset of the second industrial revolution. Economist and theorist Jeremy Rifkin argues that major economic paradigms are driven by the convergence of three technologies: new communication, new power/energy sources, and new modes of mobility. The problem: we are at the tail end of the second industrial revolution, which relied on centralized telecommunications, fossil fuels, and internal combustion vehicles. The productivity ceiling. Rifkin notes that the marginal productivity of fossil fuel-based infrastructure has plateaued. As extraction costs rise and infrastructure degrades, trying to sustain this old paradigm requires exponential amounts of capital, leaving the global economy highly fragile to any energy shock. B. The 1973 precedent, the power of the geopolitical choke point. In October 1973, Arab members of OPEC instituted an oil embargo against the U.S. and its allies for supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. The impact: crude prices quadrupled from $3 to nearly $12 per barrel overnight. The systemic result: it triggered a decade of stagflation, high inflation, high unemployment, stagnant growth, and showed how a localized geopolitical move can cripple global manufacturing. C. The 2008 CDS collapse trigger, the oil connection. While the 2008 crisis is usually blamed entirely on subprime mortgages, energy economists point out that the immediate catalyst was a massive spike in oil prices. The trigger: in July 2008, oil hit an all-time high of $147 per barrel. The domino effect: this extreme price spike acted as an immediate tax on consumers. Families suddenly had to choose between paying for gasoline to commute to work or paying their mortgages. Discretionary spending collapsed, defaults spiked, and the trillion-dollar tower of credit default swaps (CDS) built on those mortgages imploded. 2. Why today is far worse than 1973. Compare and contrast. The current crisis involving the Strait of Hormuz is fundamentally different and far more systemic than the 1973 embargo. Metric/dimension. 1973 Saudi embargo. 2026 current situation. Global debt levels: low to moderate. Sovereign debt was manageable, and financial derivatives, like CDS, barely existed. Catastrophic. Global debt exceeds 330% of global GDP. The financial system is highly leveraged with complex derivatives. Supply chain model, localized and regional. Large inventories held locally. Heavy manufacturing took place close to raw inputs. Just in time. JIT. Zero margin for error. Clocks cross oceans 3 to 4 times. Highly dependent on uninterrupted transit. Material input scope, primary group focus. The disruption was seen mostly at the gas pump and in heating oil. Foundational synthesis. Energy is tied to advanced computing, helium cooling, agriculture, fertilizer/urea, and plastics. Monetary resilience. Rising interest rates worked. Central banks could raise rates to combat inflation, e.g., Volcker shock. Trapped. Raising rates to combat energy-driven inflation risks, immediately defaulting on the $34 plus trillion U.S. national debt. 3. Game theory and economic cascades. What lies ahead? When you apply the 1973 embargo, the 2008 derivative collapse, and Rifkin's energy entropy theories to the current situation, we can construct a game theory payoff matrix to predict how this crisis unfolds. Strait of Hormuz closure filled down pointing triangle. Oil surges to $180 minus $250 per barrel. Filled down pointing triangle. Consumer discretionary spending collapses. Filled down pointing triangle. Mass corporate and household debt default. Filled down pointing triangle. Implosion of the $1 plus quadrillion derivatives and CDS market. Phase 1. The initial price shock. The rational actor dilemma. In a sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz, 20 million barrels of oil per day disappears from the market. To replace the physical deficit, oil prices must rise high enough to physically destroy demand. Based on historical elasticities from 1973 and 2008, crude prices would likely soar to between $180 and $250 per barrel. Gas pump impact. In the United States, this translates to national average gasoline prices reaching $6.50 to $8.50 per gallon, with regions like California easily exceeding $10 to $12 per gallon. Phase 2. The consumer tipping point, the 2008 reprise. At $8 plus per gallon, the consumer economy comes to a grinding halt. Just as in 2008, households devote all discretionary income to energy, food, and basic utilities. Auto loans, commercial real estate loans, and credit card payments go into default. The financial trigger, the trillion-dollar global derivatives market, specifically credit default swaps built on corporate real estate debt, begins to unspool. This time, the systemic risk is even higher than in 2008 because the leverage is distributed across the shadow banking system, making it harder for the government to step in and bail it out. Phase 3. The systemic breakdown, the Rifkin paradigm shift. As the old fossil fuel infrastructure faces this irreversible shock, the global economy hits the wall that Jeremy Rifkin predicted. The industrial reset. The extreme cost of energy halts the production of fertilizer, heavy transit, and semiconductor cooling. The endgame wealthy nations are forced to make a hard choice. Do they print money to keep the economy from collapsing, risking hyperinflation and the end of the dollar? Or do they allow the massive debt bubble to burst, initiating a global depression? Summary. The final expectations. If we apply our 3 metrics, we should not expect a simple recession. We should expect the end of the just-in-time, debt-leveraged global economic model. Actually, let's try that again. To understand the sheer magnitude.
I think something is, Jeremy Rifkin's era and today's era. If we compare the debt markets and everything else, what are, and also the safeguards of quantitative easing that was implemented, how are these, quote, solutions, quote, exasperating or helping the situation?
To understand whether modern safeguards like quantitative easing, QE, are actually solving the crisis or making it worse, we can examine them through Jeremy Rifkin's economic lens. In Rifkin's analysis of the Third Industrial Revolution, he argues that a sustainable economic era requires a fundamental shift in real physical infrastructure. Decentralized renewable energy, digital communication, and automated transport. The core issue with QE and the massive expansion of the last 2 decades is that they are financial fixes applied to a physical, structural problem. By using monetary tools to paper over deep real-world bottlenecks, central banks have created government bonds and mortgage-backed securities from commercial banks. This injects massive amounts of cash into the financial system to prevent credit markets from freezing up. The illusion of solvency. By lowering interest rates to near zero and flooding banks with liquidity, QE makes it incredibly cheap to borrow. This encourages corporations to take on more debt to keep operating, which prevents defaults in the short term. The Rifkin critique. Rifkin's work highlights that true economic growth comes from productivity gains, making the extraction, conversion, and distribution of energy more efficient. QE does not build new, efficient physical infrastructure. Instead, it artificially props up the legacy, inefficient fossil fuel-based infrastructure of the Second Industrial Revolution. 2. While the safeguards are exacerbating the crisis, instead of solving the underlying structural issues, these financial mechanisms have led to 3 systemic distortions that make the current crisis far more dangerous than the ones Rifkin originally observed. A. The creation of zombie systems. By keeping interest rates near zero for over a decade, central banks allowed highly indebted, unproductive companies, often called zombie companies, to survive. The result: instead of letting the market naturally restructure or allowing capital to flow to highly efficient third industrial revolution technologies like decentralized microgrids, capital was trapped in propping up inefficient legacy industries. The danger now that inflation is rising due to physical constraints, like the oil, fertilizer, and helium shortages, central banks have been forced to hike interest rates. This immediately threatens to bankrupt these zombie corporations that cannot survive without cheap credit. B. The wealth gap and asset inflation. QE does not inject money directly into the pockets of everyday consumers to buy real-world goods. Instead, that money stays in the banking system, where it flows directly into financial assets, stocks, real estate, and derivatives. The distortion. This creates massive asset inflation. Real estate prices soar far beyond what the median income can afford. The leverage trap. It encourages the creation of complex financial derivatives, similar to the credit default swaps of 2008, built on top of these artificially inflated asset values. The financial system becomes a massive, leveraged, inverted pyramid resting on a very small, fragile, real-world economic base. C. The debt supercycle trap. The cul-de-sac. The biggest way QE exacerbates the problem is by trapping central banks in a corner. The Federal Reserve's dilemma. In 1973, the Federal Reserve could aggressively hike interest rates to 20%, the Volcker shock, to kill inflation because the national debt was relatively small, around 33% of GDP. The current reality. Today, the U.S. national debt exceeds $34 trillion, over 120% of GDP. If the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, TO combat energy minus driven inflation. The cost OF servicing the government's own debt spikes TO over *1 trillion a year. The trap. Central banks cannot use their legacy tools to stop inflation without triggering a sovereign debt crisis. But if they restart QE to bail out the government, they pump more liquidity into the system, driving inflation even higher. 3. Compare and contrast Rifkin's era versus today. Feature. The early Rifkin paradigm, pre-QE era. Today's debt and QE era. Monetary response. Standard interest rate cuts and fiscal spending, massive quantitative easing, and direct balance sheet expansion. Systemic debt, high, but tied to physical production and expansion. Extreme, disconnected from physical productivity, tied to financial speculation. The safety valve, central banks could raise rates to clear out bad debt. Central banks are trapped. Raising rates threatens a sovereign default. Real-world impact, caused severe recessions, but allowed the system to reset, postponed the reset, creating a larger, more fragile financial bubble. 4. Game theory, the 2 destructive paths forward. Because central banks used QE to push off the day of reckoning, they are now left with 2 distinct, high-risk options in the face of a physical resource shortfall like the Strait of Hormuz closure. Path A, the liquidate everything strategy, deflationary collapse. Central banks accept the reality of the crisis. They do not intervene with QE, they let interest rates stay high, and they let the market clear out bad debt. The consequence: millions of households default on their mortgages and auto loans. Thousands of zombie companies go bankrupt. The derivatives market implodes, triggering a 2008-style financial freeze. It temporarily stops inflation by physically destroying consumer demand, but it triggers a severe global depression. Path B, the print to infinity strategy, stagflation/hyperinflation. Terrified of a financial collapse, central banks pivot back to QE. They print trillions of dollars to bail out banks, subsidize consumer fuel costs, and buy up government bonds to keep interest rates low. The consequence: since the underlying physical bottleneck, the lack of oil, fertilizer, and helium has not been fixed, more money inflation or hyperinflation, the US dollar loses its global purchasing power, accelerating the de-dollarization trend and destroying the domestic economy from the inside out. Actually, hold on, let me start over. To understand whether modern safeguard.
There you have it. What are these guys doing? Why is there a tanker here? Huh? I don't know why they got a tanker here. They need water? Interesting. What's going on? Let's see. Make a chicken salad. Yeah, demade means to stop. Stop sign. Wife's home. All right, let's go make some lunch. Make lunch. All right. Let's see. Let's get some shots. Grab some shots. Oh, my flowers, right? Look at all my purple flowers. Oh, my garden full of flowers. My British. Left here. Let's grab my speaker. I'm gonna die soon. All right.
Have you ever noticed that the old people's iPhone storage is always full? You know why? Old people always make these three big mistakes. Let me show you.
Working. Let's see here.
And they sue everybody all the time now. I'm gonna sue. I'm gonna sue you. I'm gonna use a lawsuit. It's just like, dude, oh my God. That's what we used to claim the other side did, and now we're like full board. Oh, I'm suing you.
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. Delighted to welcome back to the show one of our favorite former member of Congress from Illinois. He's served in the Air Force and Air National Guard. He's on Substack. And he's the author of a new children's book out next week. That's What Heroes Do. It's Adam Kinzinger.
Hey.
So it's kind of the male fatherly urge to propagandize children.
That's right.
Consume
That's
children.
right. About you can help people. Like, that's my propaganda. My propaganda is not, Thomas the Turtle rides on the back of Trump to victory. It's just like, hey, you kids can be a hero. Just live for something bigger than yourself.
Okay, I paged through it, so I'm going to have some notes for you at the end of the show, but we've got some to talk about first. I want to start with Iran. And I think it's important to frame a couple of the topics around Iran around something, and I don't want to slur you. So I think this is true about you. I kind of joke about how I'm a former neocon or recovering neocon. You kind of still are a neocon, right? I mean, basically, kind of. At least you're in the milieu, at least, And so, wearing that hat, how would you assess the state of play in the Iran war? Putting on your neocon Kinzinger hat.
It's like, okay, first off, I want to make neocon great again, right? I want to go back to the original neoconism, but we're in a terrible
Irving
place.
Crystal.
Yeah, exactly. We're in a terrible place because here's the deal. Donald Trump did not prepare people for this. I mean, the thing people that they're conveniently ignoring is like 2 days prior to the beginning of this war, we had a State of the Union address, which you would think it would talk about a little more than just maybe in bypass mentioning Iran. He didn't prepare the people. He certainly made it clear from day one in his posts, in his tweets, in his discussion. He made it very clear that he wanted this to be over quickly, and Iran saw that. Now, if you're going to actually use military force, one thing you don't want to do is give the enemy any reason to outlast you. You don't want to say, hey, I've got only this much patience, guys. Right. So, capitulate. And so they knew that they had a high threshold of pain. They knew they could just wait this through. And then now we end up in a place where, they claim, and I mean, all the defenders of this are saying, well, we're denuclearized Iran. Okay, I could argue maybe we denuclearized a little bit in June. The stuff is still there. Nothing has changed from June, though. All of this nuclear material still exists. There's no agreement, and now we're in this standoff where during the actual kinetic part of the war, we were releasing all this Iranian oil to the world market. Now we're trying to make up for it by having a blockade in the Persian Gulf or in the Strait of Hormuz. And all we're doing is basically destroying the world economy and hoping that Iran is fighting with itself. But we don't see any indication of that besides Trump's post. So I think the bottom line I would say on this is if you're going to go to war, and this is the neocon side of me, if you're going to go to war, you prepare the American people for it. And you also understand that your first plans may not actually work. What is it? Plans never survive first contact with the enemy. And you have to be willing to actually do what you need to do to achieve your goals. And we're in the worst of all cases right now.
Were you there on day one, or did you have some help for this?
I was kind of here on day one. There was part of me that's like, hoping that this works out, the Iranian regime collapses.
It'd be great for the Iranian people to be free, right? Like there's this little Jiminy Cricket inside of you, or Jiminy Kane. It's like it would be great if they were free, So there's that feeling, but like hope is not a strategy.
No, and it's also what I understood about Donald Trump too is that he wants out as quickly as he wants out, right? He wanted this to be a quick strike. And I knew this was going to end up making things worse. And here's the other thing I want to make, an important point, because you'll see all the defenders out there saying, well, we have reduced their ballistic missile capacity. We've reduced their drone capacity. Sure. But listen, why does the United States buy weapons? We buy weapons so that we can defend ourselves, defend our allies, and project power. Why does Iran buy weapons? Iran buys weapons so that it can keep the regime in power. So where are we at today? Yes, Iran has less weapons. You know who else has less weapons? The United States of America, because we depleted a lot of our weapons. So if we're just going by which side has less weapons than they started with, then we both lost. Secondarily, the regime is still in place, so the weapons that they bought have achieved their goal of keeping them in place. So there is no way you can look at this, at least where we sit today, and say this is a victory.
We have fewer ships and we have fewer patriots. Whoopee, that's great. I'm with you on that, and I'll get over to Ukraine in a second, but just staying with Iran, at least the lesson of Ukraine is they innovated, right? And I think that there's some limitations to the Iranian regime that's going to make it harder for them to innovate than Ukraine, but you're already kind of seeing it from Iran, right? Like they might have fewer traditional ships now, but you can see the way that okay, well, once you get punched in the face, like you have to adapt. And, they might end up becoming more adept at drone technology. And they certainly now seem more adept at keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed than they thought that they were beforehand. So,
and this is the whole point, Tim, is like, yeah, okay, we sunk their Navy. What was their Navy for? To close the Strait of Hormuz. What their Navy did?
What was their Navy going to do? Yeah. Was the ships going to ride across the Atlantic?
Exactly.
And attack us at Savannah?
We blew up all their cavalry horses. Awesome. Okay. Right? They were never going to use them. And so it's that. The other thing is coming off of Venezuela, there was this, and you remember the story about the guy that's like, all the troops came out with magic lasers and helicopters and all this stuff. There was this impression of the United States that we had a lot of technology we were holding back. We were this amazing power. That was blown in Iran, right? I mean, the military executed their job fantastically. The problem is, it's dying: diplomatic, information, military, and economic, right? You have to do all four of those things. We did the military part well. The other one I want to just briefly mention:
diplomatic, information, military, economic.
And economic. Those are the four tools you have to use to control an enemy. But the information side, this is what drives me nuts. So they will attack, Democrats for opposing this war and say they are the reason. This is what Hegseth said. They are the reason. They're the chief enemy. They're the reason we're losing. Listen, Iran put out these Lego memes, right, that were hilarious, but this was information warfare. That's how you do information warfare now. So what did the White House do? Instead of the White House countering with their own version of a Lego meme, making the regime look stupid, they were putting out memes against Democrats. So Iran was attacking the United States was attacking itself. And then we wonder why this is unpopular and why Trump is losing the information war.
Yeah, okay, a couple other insights unpopular. So first, this is today, May 1st, where we've run out of the 60 days under the War Powers Resolution. The administration says that the war in Iran is over, so they don't need to seek congressional approval. According to the AP, Pete Hegseth offered kind of a different view, which is that the days don't count during a ceasefire. That isn't actually in the legislation, but you know they're iterating. It's a little confusing. If the war is over, then why is the Strait of Hormuz closed? What's happening with that? I don't. It's hard to understand.
And why do they still have nuclear, material? Because I thought that was the aim of the war. And by the way, a blockade is an act of war. Let's just be clear. That's internationally recognized as an act of war. Yeah. The War Powers Resolution, which are days by which to then get approval or pull the troops out. It doesn't say 60 business days. It doesn't say 60 war days. It says from that moment, there are 60 calendar days by which you have to take this action. And so I think what they're trying to do, clearly, is to reset the clock. They should just say they're going to ignore it. Because that's what they're going to do. That's what every president does, honestly, instead of pretending, that too cute by half. But yeah, if the war is over, then we achieved absolutely none of our aims. And, you can tell by Trump's panics.
Actually, yeah, things are worse if the war's over. So this is just today on the gas prices jump over the last week, just as one data point for how bad the economic situation is. Indiana is up $1.09 in the last week. Ohio's up 94 cents.
Freedom costs $1.09. That was from Team America, real police. Anyway.
Is that right?
Yeah. Freedom costs $1.09. All right.
Well, let's play a little bit from Team America. I like that. I haven't heard it in a while. We'll put that in it.
And if you don't throw in your bucko five, who will?
America, fuck yeah. Okay. Ohio up 94 cents a gallon. Michigan 88. Colorado 47. Here's the inflection point of this week. This comparison to COVID, where it's like we knew that there's this bad thing that was coming to the global, this was global health, but also the global economy. But it was like, we're going to do 2 weeks to stop the spread, and then things will get better. And then about the time that Tom Hanks and Rudy Gobert got COVID, everybody was like, wait a minute, this is going to be worse. And I kind of feel like that is happening this week. The gas prices, where people are like, regular people are waking up to the fact that, like, wait a minute, this thing is not snapping back this summer. Like, we have created an economic calamity that is going to reverberate at least through the year, maybe longer. And like, we don't exactly know how bad it's going to get, but there's going to be unpredictable bad things that happen because supply chains are complicated and you don't know how shortages in tea are going to affect, consumers there. So I've been on the top edge of catastrophizing on this, but I'm wondering where you're at on it.
Well, I think you're right. And, look, I saw this amazing graphic that I kind of wish was out there more. It was this animated graphic, and it basically showed the tankers that leave the Strait of Hormuz and where they go. And it made the point that a tanker travels at the speed of a bicycle. So you have to imagine if you leave the port. Yeah.
Like a Tour de France bicycle or like me?
No, like you on a bicycle. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So pretty slow and pretty breathy. But when you're leaving the port, I had a couple of sayings at Jazz Fest yesterday. Get off my back. It happens. So when you're leaving the port, imagine literally riding a bicycle around, right? And then going to the port that you're going into. And this is why for 2 or 3 months, we haven't had massive fuel disruption, because basically the bicycles that had left before the war started were completing their journey. Now, if the strait opens today, like if today it's like, boom, oil flows, it takes that first bicycle leaving the strait to the ports they're going to begin to see an influx of oil again. On top of that, Tim, every country now, China's doing this. We have to refill our strategic petroleum reserve. And every country that has the financial resources to do it is going to make a decision to now have a petroleum reserve. So you imagine that kind of accordion effect now of not just filling the current needs or the deficit of needs on oil, But on top of that, now everybody's going to be building these massive tanks to store oil in. And so you can see this supply shock lasting for a very long time. And I think you're right. I don't think we understand, the helium shortage. What does that actually mean? What does it mean on the plastic side of things? And, we're lucky, honestly, we're lucky to be Americans because we're not going to run out of oil. But the problem is we're also the ones that, in essence, created this problem. And so we're like, hey, screw you guys. This is, we're fine.
And that's just the oil part of it, right? I mean, there's, we've been talking about this when I've had the econ experts on the fertilizer, the urea, the helium. Like, there's a lot of shit that also impacts various supply chains, various products that people use. So anyway, Tom Hanks has COVID. Bad things are coming. That's exactly something about that section.
It's funny that you say that, though, because I remember the day Tom Hanks got COVID is like, oh my gosh, a famous person got it. This is real.
Oh, no. We're so pumped. Y'all know my schedule is pretty nuts. Yapping with you guys all day, just yapping. Get dad stuff. Coaching season is over, but we're still parenting. And I live in New Orleans. So I had visitors from out of town. I think the last 3 weekends and like 2 of the next 3. So I got stuff happening all the time. So when you got that plus middle age, can have me feel a little rough some mornings. Some of you guys notice that from time to time and point it out, which I really do appreciate. And so even when I get a good night's sleep, sometimes I won't feel 100%. If you feel this way too, our friends at Juvenon can help. Juvenon was founded alongside Nobel Prize winning scientists who spent decades studying cellular energy and how biological systems age. Their flagship product, Blood Flow 7, boosts blood flow to support healthy blood pressure, energy, and circulation. That means steady energy throughout the day, sharper mental clarity, warmer hands and feet. My extremities get chilly. I don't know about you guys. And even better performance benefits, not as much of an issue for me. Look, when it comes to Blood Flow 7, I've seen it. That mid-afternoon slump starts to go away a little bit. And I don't have to worry so much about my little piggies getting chilly. And honestly, it's a journey. But I need it. And I'm happy with our friends at Juvenon. Remember Juvenon's promise to you is a simple one: uncomplicated longevity. So head to bloodflow7.com/thebulwark and use code THEBULWARK for 30% off your order. Once again, that's bloodflow7.com/thebulwark for 30% off, and make sure you use my promo code THEBULWARK so they know I sent you. Speaking of the breathy dust going across the seas, we've been on this story that we wanted to get to all week, which is Israel, our partner in this.
Our Attorney General has been up there. The walls are coming through. There's too many of them.
For purchasing stolen grain that came from Ukraine. And there's a specific ship that had taken port at Haifa that had stolen Russian grain on it. And the media was alerted to this, and Israel backed off of taking it. But then we have come to learn that this wasn't the first one. And that Israel has been accepting, Russian grain that was stolen from Ukraine. In addition, and this is kind of a separate thing, but this has been happening for a while. Like, Israel has been buying Russian oil this whole time too, and has some waivers from the sanctions in order to do so. So, across a couple of vectors here, our ally in this war in Iran is. Well, maybe they are on the same side as us in the Russia-Ukraine war. I guess maybe that's the question. Maybe we're all on Russia's side. What do you make of the story?
This is a really weird thing. And this started, my interest in this started actually back at the launch of the full-scale war in Ukraine, because Israel was not giving Ukraine anything. Remember, at the beginning, this was a time when all countries were coming together, basically, and giving Ukraine something. And Israel wasn't. And I put out a statement. I was still in Congress. I put out a statement like, Israel needs to pick what side it's on. And you can imagine the blowback I got, right, from the American kind of Israeli interested crowd. And that actually opened my eyes to look, I'm simply calling out an ally for, that's supposed to love freedom for not helping another freedom-loving country. And so that actually made me quite honestly double down on it and keep watching. And then this story broke about the stolen grain.
You see a lot of that from the AIPAC world. Just putting aside all the other discourse around it, just judging them as have they been an effective advocate for their cause? boy, like the exact opposite. Like it's hard to think of an advocacy organization that has done more harm to the interests that they claim to be pursuing, frankly.
Yes,
and like your example is just one. That's just one example. We've seen so many that are similar.
And spending money against Tom Malinowski in New Jersey, simply because he said, like, hey, we should condition some aid when his opponent is like, hates Israel supposedly or whatever. I don't pay attention to race, but certainly not as pro-Israel. It's crazy. But so the stolen grain issue, I mean, it took finally Zelensky calling them out, a lot of public pressure. Israel's response was, we don't do Twitter diplomacy, which they really do Twitter diplomacy. And it's crazy. Egypt, by the way, when confronted with this, canceled their grain orders. So Egypt did the right thing. And it was amazing seeing the right come out and try to defend Israel on this. And I don't know the full details of why this last shipment was rejected. I had actually heard that at some point the buyer is the one that said no to it. So it wasn't necessarily that Israel had to interdict the grain. But listen, the easiest thing Israel can do if they want to maintain the friends they have in the United States is to support Ukraine. Listen, you don't have to send them all your patriots, although I would say send them some patriots. You don't have to send them all your weapons. I get it. You're threatened at this moment, but at least doing little things like not buying grain from Russia. But there is a weird affection between Vladimir Putin and Netanyahu, like there is between Putin and Donald Trump. There's something in that kind of right-wing alliance thing that's going on, and it's been there for a while between Netanyahu and Putin.
Yes, that's the whole Epstein files. They both control Trump, so they're buddies. That's the reality. The Epstein files. Putin and Israel. We are a puppet state for Putin and Israel. That's the reality. I have some ice cream. Yep, I told you. Didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you last week? Get ready for your oil gas to go up. There is no more buffer. The buffer is gone, guys. The buffer is gone. The buffer is gone. Al, the buffer is gone. Now America has to deal with it, and it's going to keep going up. You're going to see gas prices hitting probably a $5 average in the United States by the end of this month. Yep. That bananas and ice cream. I'm gonna get off here after I get my coma. I went to the yard. Put some honey on this. Japanese honey. There you go. Have salad. Now dessert. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, they're they're gonna be crying. Give this by this month. He's hemorrhaging people. Poor G. Trump is gonna have Trump's popularity is gonna drop to the 20s this month. That's my prediction. He's at 32%. He's practically at 20% on there. And the thing is, they're not owning anyone anymore, right? They're not owning anyone. They're just owning themselves. I mean, who's what? Yeah, we all have to pay more gas. We all getting fucked on our rent, everything. It's insane. Yeah. We're going to see impeachment before January. There'll be calls for impeachment in December. They all need to be impeached. It's all going to come out. All of the war crimes and everything. Really, the simplest solution is to impeach Trump and then, send him to The Hague for prosecution. What do you mean he pulled out? He returned them home, or they headed to Iran? Deep dive on troop movements. I heard that Trump returned 5,000 troops from Germany. Is that true? What's going on with troop movements? Can we game theory out what's going on by looking at troop movements in Europe over the last week?
Understand what is happening with the reported movement of 5,000 troops out of Germany. We need to separate recent administrative adjustments from the larger strategic shift in how the United States is positioning its forces across the European continent. While the exact number of 5,000 troops returning to the U.S. reflects specific unit rotations and redeployments, the real story lies in where the U.S. is moving its forces within Europe. Let's break down the facts of the recent movements, analyze the strategic shift from Western Europe to the eastern flank, and apply game theory to understand what these movements signal to both U.S. allies and adversaries. 1. The facts. What's happening with U.S. troops in Germany? The reports of U.S. troops leaving Germany are tied to a broader policy of restructuring the American military footprint in Europe. A. The drawdown from Germany. For several years, there has been consistent pressure from Washington to reduce the permanent U.S. military presence in Germany. The recent return or reassignment of approximately 5,000 personnel from German bases, such as Ramstein, Stuttgart, and Grafenwohr, is a mix of returning units to the continental United States and permanently reassigning them. The rationale. The administration's stated view is that Germany, a wealthy nation with a high GDP, should bear more of the financial and physical burden for its own defense, rather than relying on a permanent American garrison that has been in place since the end of World War II. B. The Eastern shift. The troops haven't all gone home. It's a common misconception that all troops leaving Germany are returning to the U.S. In reality, the U.S. has been executing a major strategic pivot to the east, Poland and the Baltic states. Over the last several years, the U.S. has shifted significant forces, including armored brigade combat teams and rotational units, further east toward Poland, Romania, and the Baltics. Vanguard positioning. Moving troops out of Germany and into these frontline states positions American firepower directly along the NATO-Russia border. 2. Game theory analysis. What do these movements signal? In the context of game theory, troop movements are a form of signaling. They convey intent, commitment, and strategy to both adversaries, Russia, and allies, NATO members, without firing a shot. By analyzing the movement of 5,000 troops out of Germany and the parallel buildup in Eastern Europe, we can outline the strategic payoff matrix for the key actors. Scenario A. The abandonment.
No, I think you're missing. I think we need to look at all the troop movements headed towards the Iran theater. We're not necessarily against Russia. Everything is moving there. Deep dive search where are all the troops right now being housed that are focused on the Iran theater.
Arguing the true scale of a pivot toward the Iran theater, we have to look past the troop movements in Europe and examine asterisks in the US, Central Commands, CENTCOM, asterisk actual physical footprint around the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the broader Middle East. While the US has reduced some permanent ground forces over the last decade, it has replaced them with highly mobile, rotational naval, air, and special operations assets that can surge into the region on short notice. The current troop concentrations, key bases, and strategic staging areas targeting the Iran theater are outlined below. 1. The core CENTCOM infrastructure, where the troops are housed. The U.S. military maintains a ring of major bases around Iran. These installations house roughly 40,000 to 50,000 U.S. personnel across the region, functioning as the primary staging grounds for any sustained campaign.
Yeah, but I heard that those bases were hit aggressively by Iran. Can you search independent news and find out the impact of those bases by Iran?
The latest independent defense and news reporting as of May 2026, there are no verified reports of major Iranian missile or drone strikes directly hitting the primary U.S. air and naval hubs in the Persian Gulf, such as Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Al Dhafra in the UAE, or Naval Support Activity Bahrain. However, independent reporting does detail highly active, persistent asymmetric engagements affecting the broader U.S. military footprint in the region. 1. Where direct attacks have occurred. While the large TIER-1 bases in the Gulf have not been struck by direct Iranian ballistic missiles, smaller forward operating sites and logistics nodes have seen repeated actions. Forward bases in Iraq and Syria, sites like Tower 22 on the Jordan-Syria border, Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, and the Conoco Mission Support Site in Syria have faced intermittent drone and rocket harassment from regional Iran-backed umbrella groups, such as the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. Impact of these strikes. Most of these attacks involve.
Yeah, I think that it was probably strategic, right? They targeted those because they knew they would be less defended. Whereas if they targeted a major U.S. base, it'd be highly defended. Correct?
Hit on the exact strategic calculus that drives this kind of warfare. Your assessment is entirely correct, and it highlights the core logic of asymmetric conflict. In military and game theory terms, this is known as exploiting the seam. By bypassing the heavily fortified core and striking the less defended periphery, Iran and its proxy networks maximize their operational success while minimizing their risks. 1. The air defense disparity. Hard targets versus soft targets. The difference in defense capabilities between a Tier 1 hub and a forward operating site, FOS, is massive. Major Gulf bases, the Iron Dome of the Middle East, sites like Al Udeid, Qatar, and Al Dhafra, UAE, are what military planners call hard targets. Layered defense. They are protected by Patriot PAC, 3 batteries for high-altitude threats, and THAAD systems for ballistic missiles, supplemented by short-range air defense systems for drones. Radars and visibility. They have advanced continuous radar coverage linked directly to the U.S. Navy's Aegis systems in the Gulf. This gives them ample warning time to track and intercept.
I thought Iran hit the Aegis system. Not Iraq. Iran, not Iraq.
That distinction is absolutely crucial. When we shift the focus to direct attacks initiated by the Iranian state itself rather than its proxies, the entire strategic logic changes. While the proxy strategy is about playing in the gray zone to avoid direct retribution, a direct strike launched from Iranian territory by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, is a clear, unambiguous statement of escalation. The historical precedent for this is the January 2020 missile attack on Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, which Iran launched directly from its own soil in retaliation for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Looking at the latest data and military analysis as of May 2026, when Iran calculates a direct strike, it applies a very specific, high-stakes logic. 1. Why Iran chooses direct strikes on less defended sites. If Iran decides to step out from behind its proxies and launch a direct, state-on-state attack, it carefully selects its targets based on air defense saturation limits and escalation management. A. Maximizing the probability of a hit. If the Iranian leadership wants to send a powerful message or exact revenge, it cannot afford for its missiles to be publicly intercepted by a U.S. Patriot or THAAD battery. Target selection. Iran bypasses the ultra-heavily defended Tier 1 hubs in the Gulf, like Al Udeid or Al Dhafra, because the risk of a total intercept is too high. The vulnerability window. Instead, it targets smaller forward operating sites where the U.S. has either limited air defense systems or systems that can be overwhelmed. In the 2020 Al-Assad attack, for example, the base did not have active Patriot missile batteries installed at the time, which allowed Iranian ballistic missiles to strike the base directly with high precision. B. Direct signaling without crossing the all-out war threshold. In game theory, a direct strike is a form of brinkmanship. Iran wants to demonstrate its capability and willingness to hit American forces directly, but it does not want to trigger a full-scale invasion of Iran. The calculated attack. By targeting a less defended forward base, Iran can cause significant physical damage to infrastructure, hangars, runways, living quarters, while avoiding the kind of mass casualties that would force the U.S. into a total war scenario. The message. The strike tells Washington, asterisk, our missiles are precise enough to hit your troops. Next time, if we choose, we can direct them at your major hubs. 2. The asymmetric mathematics. Overwhelming the defense. When Iran attacks directly, it doesn't just rely on precision, it relies on saturation. Even the best air defense systems have a physical limit to the number of targets they can track and engage at the same time. The interceptor limit. A single Patriot battery has a set number of missiles ready to fire. The salvo attack. If Iran launches a coordinated salvo of 15 to 20 ballistic missiles directly from its territory,